Welcome to my video everybody. My name's Rebecca Jarman and I'm going to show you how to paint this pretty autumn oak leaf today. Next I'll show you what materials you're going to need to paint it. So for our painting today guys, we're going to need a few things. I'll just show you the paints that we're going to use. This lovely sap green, paint called quinacridone gold, burnt sienna and alizarin crimson. Okay, so those are the four colours I'm going to be using. You will also need a piece of watercolour paper. As you can see, I've already drawn my oak leaf on there. I've drawn it a little bit darker than I would do normally, just so that you guys can see on the camera. I've got my paint palette with my paints in. I have used just an ordinary HP pencil to do my drawing with. We will be using some form of stick, so I think this is like, you could use a cocktail stick. This is like a kebab stick, it's just a wooden stick with a kind of, not really a sharp point, but a point on the end, a blunted point. And I'll tell you what we're going to do with that shortly. I've got 3 brushes. They're all round brushes. This is a number 8. I've got a number 4. And I've also got a number 2. So I'll be using those all to do this painting. The 8 is purely for wetting the paper before we apply the paint. I've got some kitchen paper towel to clean my brushes on, and I also have a jar of clean water to clean my brush. So let's get started. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using those 4 colours, and I'm going to paint a lovely autumn leaf. We're going to start off by wetting the entire shape. So I've drawn the outline onto the watercolour paper, I've wet my brush, and I'm going to carefully just wet the surface of the paper now. So using the point of my brush to come up carefully to the edges. It doesn't matter if the water goes slightly over the line, but what's going to happen is we're going to apply the paint to this wet surface and the paint will splay into the water. So anywhere that's dry, the paint won't run into that area. So that's how we're going to control it today. So the water allows the paint to spread across the surface and mix with each colour. If you're not sure where you've applied the water, just look from the side. And that's why I'm using a larger brush, to try and speed up the process, because obviously by the time you've got to the bottom of the leaf, the top of the leaf is going to be dry, so try and do it as quickly as you can. We can also re-wet the areas if it begins to dry as we're painting. Okay, so I'm just looking from an angle. If I bring the picture up, you should be able to see that the surface is damp. Okay, so it's shiny, but there aren't any big puddles on there. Next, I'm going to take the number 4 brush, and I'm going to begin by applying some of the sap green paint. Just mix up some more on my palette there. And I'm going to begin in the centre. Oops. And you can see I'm just placing the paint down. You can see these marks are nice and soft because it's running into the water, which is perfect. So I just want the green kind of in the centre there. That's absolutely fab. Then the next colour I'm going into is the quinacridone gold. I'm loading my brush up with lots of paint, and I'm going to let that go sort of around the green, but blend in with the green as well, and just work nice and quickly so that the paint doesn't have time to dry in between applications. So obviously on a leaf, the colours change gradually, so you get a nice blend of tone across the leaf. You don't get any hard lines, so this is why we've wet the paper first. The next colour I'm going to use is the burnt sienna. Now that area is starting to dry, so I'm going to go in with my big brush, just put some more water down Okay, so the top areas are obviously beginning to dry now. So I'm just popping down some water. It doesn't matter that the paint that I've already got on the surface there is also going to the edges, that's absolutely fine. The brown that I'm applying is going to be darker than that quinacridone gold, so it's covering that up. So you can see I've got a nice deep brown on the edges here. I'm just going to work really quickly. Let's get some more brown in this area. Really quickly so that I don't get any hard lines. It's all blending nicely together. Okay. And just be a little bit more careful at the edges. And these colours are blending nicely. And there's a bit of texture to my paper. I'm using what we call a knot paper, which means there's a slight texture to the surface. It's not completely smooth. With watercolour paper there's 3 types. You get a knot, which I'm using with this slight texture. You get what we call a rough, which has got a lot more texture than this one. And then you get something called a hot pressed, which is completely smooth. But I tend to find that knot is the best one for most things, so I usually go for that. You get lovely textures then. The paint sits in some of the little dimples on the paper. And I'm just going to bring this brown down here and the same across here. As you just saw, I had to re-wet some of those areas again because it's drying quite quickly. So although we're in the start of autumn, this room's quite warm. I haven't got the heating on yet, which is great, but the air is obviously warm enough to dry the paper before I've got a chance to come down to this area, so that's fine. Just added a bit more water and then continued painting. And I'm going to drag this all the way down. It's a little bit damp here, there's a puddle, so I'm just going to grab my paper towel and mop up that water, which is fine to do. Just bring that brown down to the bottom there. Okay, so what have we got so far? This is looking good, I like it. I might go back into the quinacridone gold and just encourage some of that just to brighten that quinacridone gold, make it a little bit more visible, if you like. So this is a slightly thicker mix of quinacridone gold that I've got here, and I'm just popping it down. Now I'm cleaning my brush off. Okay, the surface is still slightly damp. I'm going to go back into my sap green here, just pop a little bit more of that down as well, just to sort of touch the quinacridone gold that I just put down and soften those edges a little bit. Okay, bring some of that green down the stem as well. Lovely. So it's all quite simple so far. Absolutely anybody can create this painting. It's a nice beginner's painting, great for autumn. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into my crimson, which is on the other side of my palette here. Hopefully you can still see that on the screen. Now crimson is a really strong colour, and I've mixed up a nice thick application of paint. And what I want to do is just dab the tip of my brush to some areas of the leaf, so not everywhere, but in 1 or 2 little areas, and you can see because it's wet, it's splaying across the surface, which is really what we want. And I need to go back into the paint, a little bit more paint. Just, you get these lovely areas of little sections of red that pop through. Gives a nice texture to the surface if you have little dots, and let it just splay out. Because obviously leaves have got a beautiful texture. And so I'm just sort of working that red around the page here and there. You can bring some odd spots into the middle as well if you want to. Don't go too mad with the spots, we don't want like a dotty picture, but because the surface is damp, it's actually splaying out nicely, and it's not giving us sort of defined dotty marks, so that's good. And I'm happy with that. I'm going to clean my brush off, and the next thing we need to do is just check the surface is still damp. So you can see there, if I tilt my picture, sorry I've got a little bit shaky today, that's my tremor, but hopefully you can see that that has got a lovely glaze to it, so I know it's still wet. That's perfect. Now I'm going to show you what we're doing with the stick. So obviously on leaves we have beautiful veins through them, so the stick is how we're going to create those lines. So I'm going to go to the top, the very top of my leaf, and I'm pressing quite firm, and I'm dragging that stick all the way down, and it's creating a mark. It's scratching the paper, and what's happening is the paint, because it's still slightly wet on the surface, is sinking into that groove that the stick has created. So you get these lovely lines. So I'm going to continue all the way down the leaf. You want a mark, a vein going to the tip of every little section, right from the centre on the tip, dragging it at an angle down towards your central vein. Okay, and as you can see, that's created some really nice lines in our leaf. So what we're going to do now is have a little look. I'm quite happy with the colour that I've got there, but what I'm not happy with is some of those edges. So I'm going to take my smallest brush, just wet it a little bit, and while the paint is still slightly damp, I can work on the edges now and tidy them up, just dragging that paint across just with a little bit of water and smoothing out any little rough edges that I've got going on. So obviously we're having to paint this really quickly, this technique, wet in wet, so we don't really get enough time to care about the edges, so we just do this nice and quickly while it's still slightly damp. It gives us that opportunity to tidy it up. So I'm just going around and I'm going to do the whole outside of the leaf in exactly the same way. If you need to, you can turn the picture around, move my palette out of the way, I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to work on the top. So the top is actually quite dry, but if you work at that edge, bring the bristles left and right across the surface, with that little amount of water it reactivates the paint, and it allows you then to brush that paint around, move it and create a sharper line. If it's too dry or you're finding it's not really working very well, you can always go back into a little bit of the brown. Just added some brown to my brush there, and you can use that. You can just tidy those edges up with the brown paint and drag it into the leaf a little bit, just to blend it in so that you don't get any hard lines. Just blend it into where it starts to get damp again on the surface, which is slightly further down the leaf there. So I'm just going to continue doing this in exactly the same way. A little bit of water on my brush, just tidying these areas up. It's a really fun, quick painting. It's something that is nice and easy to draw. It's quite a basic shape. If you just have a look, if you type into a search engine, Google or something, just type in oak leaf and you can get a nice picture of a leaf, nice close-up image, and copy that. Just draw the outline like I did. Mix up your paints first before you start so that you've got everything ready. And away you go, and it's all nice and wet into wet. You get a few surprises along the way because you're never entirely sure how it's going to work out. It's one of those techniques where you have to leave a little bit of your reservations at the door, if you like, because the paint's going to do what it likes to do, and that's what I love about watercolour painting. It's all blending in nicely on the surface. I'm going to go away for half an hour or so, let this dry, and then come back and show you the result. Welcome back everybody. So I've left the painting for roughly half an hour, something like that, and it's all nice and dry now. So here we have it, the final leaf. If I bring it a bit closer to the screen, you can see that it's dried and the lines are nice and strong. It's just given a little indentation into the surface of the paper and the paint has sunk down into that. So hence we're left with those lovely sharp crisp lines, and the colours have worked really well. I'm nice and happy with that. I hope you've enjoyed painting with me today. I just wanted to say a quick word on the colours. So we've used the sap green, the quinacridone gold, the burnt sienna, and also the alizarin crimson. If you don't have those colours in your palette, don't let that put you off. You could use any kind of green that you have in your palette. The quinacridone gold you could substitute for any kind of yellow, or even a yellow ochre would be fine. The burnt sienna you can mix with 3 primaries. There's a little bit of red and yellow to make an orange first of all, and then add some blue and you'll get a nice brown. And the crimson, again, just use any kind of red. You'll have a primary red in there somewhere. So any of those colours can be substituted for ones that you already have in your palette. So thanks for painting with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd love to see some of your paintings, so you could send them to me. That would be fab. Take care, have fun guys, bye.